Hello, Westside, and thank you for joining us today again as we work through the letters of John. This class has covered the letter of 1 John in its entirety. We talked about the fact that John was concerned about false teachers coming in and stealing sheep away from the church, teaching them that Jesus was not the Christ, teaching them that they could love the people that agreed with them but not love others, teaching them that they did not need to walk necessarily in obedience of all the commands of Christ. John takes exception to all of those things and says when people believe those things, we know them to be false teachers because those aren't the teachings of Jesus. And so we want to be sure that we have we rid ourselves of the false teachers in our midst and that we have people who are teaching us truth. And he talks about the fact that truth is in Jesus. So we're going to move on today from 1 John to 2 John. A lot of people haven't read through 2 John, although it's arguably the shortest book in the entire Bible, and yet it's one that is often overlooked in classes, and largely it's because it doesn't have a lot of additional information that we don't find in 1 John. And when scholars make some guess as to why John wrote 2 John, it was likely, a lot of them describe it as possibly a cover letter for 1 John. You see, back in those days, they couldn't just drop a letter in a mailbox and have it delivered in a couple of days, or send now we can send an email over the internet or give someone a phone call or whatever. Their communication was a whole lot different back in those days. And so the letters were fewer and they were generally couriered by someone that everybody knows. Because especially with the apostles, they wanted to be sure that when their communication was sent, as the Christian movement grew and grew, that when their communication was sent, that it could be demonstrated as authentic, because there were some who wrote letters representing themselves to be apostles, but indeed they were not, and they weren't telling others what the apostles wanted to tell them. And so for authenticity's sake, the apostle, whether it would be Paul or John or Peter or one of the other authors of the New Testament, would write a letter to the targeted audience and then have it brought or carried by a courier and read in different places where they assigned the courier to read it. That's the way Paul did most of his letters. A lot of his letters were sent either to a specific individual or a specific place, but some of them, like the book of Ephesians and Galatians, were sent to a large group. They were supposed to be read in a number of churches, and the courier was to stop at each place, find the church there, read the letter in their hearing, possibly allow a scribe to copy that letter for them, and then to move on to the next place. Now, John is wanting this letter to get spread around pretty quickly. And so, again, the conjecture out there is, by the scholars, is that John wrote this letter so that a scribe could quickly write down this letter. This letter would be quickly copied, and then the carrier of the letter could move on, and maybe they wouldn't have to copy the entire letter of 1 John, because this letter kind of reads as a summary, adds very little new to the 1 John, but it kind of summarizes the letter and says in short what the larger work says in more detail. And I think you'll see that as we read through that. It does add one specific thing when it talks about how to treat these false teachers, people who are identified as false teachers, when they come into their midst. How are we to deal with that? What are we to do and what are we not to do? And we'll talk about that here in just a moment. So imagine that as the courier of this letter goes to each individual church, and again, these are probably churches in Western Asia at that time, the province known as Asia Minor, Western Asia Minor, toward the Aegean Sea between the Greece and what we now know of as Turkey. Or the sea that I don't think that's the Aegean Sea, but it's a body of water, a finger of water that goes up between Greece and Turkey, and That section has several churches, mostly started by Paul in his second and third missionary journeys. And Paul, especially from the church in Ephesus, taught a number of different people, and the church began to spread in a number of different places. At this point in time, much later, probably as much as 40 years after Paul's death, John is writing these letters into this similar area. It seems that the Ephesus has kind of been the central church for this region, and John is working in Ephesus, and these letters are probably going out to these different churches. So 1st, 2nd, and 3rd John may well have been written at the same time. 2nd John, again, written possibly as a cover letter, or maybe written to a specific church. We'll cover that in just a minute. We don't know just yet. But imagine as this courier takes these letters and reads them in the setting of the church, and then asks a local scribe to quickly copy 2nd John, which basically summarizes and gives some instructions, and then this courier moves on to the next place that he's supposed to go, and does the same thing over and over and over again. It's an effective way of communicating, leaving instructions with people, and undoubtedly the letter of 1st John was copied again and again and again at a later date maybe, and distributed to these different places. But 2nd John was a way of quickly getting the information to people and leaving it with them so that they would be able to remember what was said. So again, that's a theory. We don't have obviously we don't have John saying, yeah, that's what happened, but it's a good guess. And so we can just kind of imagine 2nd John being used that way. That being said, let's go ahead and read through the entire book of 2nd John, and it won't take very long. Starting with verse 1, the elder, to the lady chosen by God and her children, whom I love in truth. And not I only, but also all who know the truth, because of the truth which lives in us, will be with us forever. Grace, mercy, and peace from God the Father and the Lord Jesus Christ, the Father's Son, will be with us in truth and in love. It has given me great joy to find some of your children walking in the truth, just as the Father commanded us. And now, dear lady, I am not writing you a new command, but one we have had from the very beginning. I asked that we love one another. And this is love, that we walk in obedience to his commands. As you have heard from the beginning, his command is that you walk in love. I say this because many deceivers who do not acknowledge Jesus as coming in the flesh have gone out into the world. Such a person is the deceiver and the Antichrist. Watch out that you do not lose what we have worked for, but that you may be rewarded fully. Anyone who runs ahead and does not continue in the teaching of Christ does not have God. Whoever continues in the teaching has both the Father and the Son. If anyone comes to you and does not bring this teaching, do not take them into your houses or welcome them. Anyone who welcomes them shares in their wicked work. I have much to write to you, but I do not want to use paper and ink. Instead, I hope to visit you and talk with you face to face, so that our joy may be complete. The children of your sister, who is chosen by God, send their greetings. So that's the quick 13-verse book of 2nd John. Again, if we understand it right, intending to be short, intending to be something that was easily copied, easily shared. Some of it would be memorized so that the people would have some brief instructions as they remember, as they're able to remember what John wrote in the larger work, 1 John. So let's look at this, just kind of in giving it some more detailed attention. John has some interesting metaphors as he writes of himself, or he refers to himself in his writings. Some of his earlier writings, the apostle Jesus loved, or the disciple that Jesus loved, was the way that John referred to himself. He doesn't use his own name. And again, not unusual in the first century, especially if the author is known to the audience, and John certainly would have been known to his audience. And so he calls himself the elder, and refers to himself that way. It could be that he was an elder at the church in Ephesus. He was, and the Greek word used there is the word we use for the word presbyter, and that's what he calls himself. I am the presbyter. So it could be again that he's an elder, or he was considered, maybe because of his apostle status, considered an elder of the church in general. but probably considered that at the church in Ephesus, and is addressing himself as the elder, and they would have known who he was speaking of. He addresses the church as the chosen lady and her children, and again, that's a little unclear. They would have known as they read through this to whom he was referring, because they likely heard him speak before, and likely were familiar with how he spoke and his metaphors that he used. This could be a number of things. The scholars who review these things and give their views on it say they give a few different ideas as to what the chosen lady and her children could be. One, it could be a specific person. 3rd John, that we'll get to next week, for instance, is addressed to a specific person, Gaius. And the letter is intended, obviously, to be given to him. It's a short letter, a short summary about what should happen. We're not sure about Gaius or who he was. We'll talk about that a little bit more next week, but there are some theories. It could be that this chosen lady and her children is a specific person, a specific woman, and the children in her home. But that's not likely. Secondly, it could be a specific church and the members of that specific church. It could be that John had given a specific church the name the chosen lady, and so this may have, if that's the case, then 2nd John may have been specifically read just to that particular church, in addition to the letter of 1 John. Again, that's possible, but not likely. The third one, and the most likely one, is that that's how he refers to the churches in their general sense, to all the churches of Christ in the region that this is addressed to, that he's writing it to the church, big with in the big picture, and those who consider themselves to be members of the church. And so he's talking about the churches that it'll be read would understand that to mean themselves and the others who are like them in these different cities. And then the children are the members of that church. In verses 1 to 2, he talks a lot about truth, and the fact that he loves them in the truth, and they know the truth. And in John's letters, we have to remember that, when we think of truth, we think in terms of the teachings of the Bible. John is always reflecting upon the teachings of Jesus and how the apostles have represented the teachings of Jesus. And so that's what John is thinking about. In John's view, as in his letters as well as in his gospel, the truth always refers to Jesus. He talks about the Word as being the person, not a book. And the Word was Jesus. The truth, eternal life, all of those things are manifestations in his metaphors to Jesus, the man. And so the teachings of Jesus are truth, and he is encouraging them, even in this introduction, to abide by the truth. In verse 3, he talks about how Jesus is with us in truth and in love, two really important elements to 1 John and also in 2 John as well, because truth and love he sees as something that goes very much together and something that are united together. Again, important concepts in his book, because Jesus is the truth. His teachings are the truth as represented by the apostles and the Holy Spirit. The teachings of the false teachers are not true then, and he wants them to be sure that they know that. Verse 4 is interesting because he says, he puts it in a positive light, but still is speaking to the issue that he's writing to, saying, "It's given me great joy to find some of your children walking in the truth." In other words, because he said some, and he's meaning not all. Not everybody's there, but some of your children are walking in the truth, and I'm glad for it. And again, he's warning them of the fact that false teachers are having some element of success in drawing some members of the church away, and he's writing for that reason, and obviously he's concerned about that, not happy about it. And so he says some of your children are walking in the truth. And some obviously have fallen away, and he has some more specific things to say about that in the larger work in 1 John. In verse 5, then, he talks about this not a new command. Jesus, in John chapter 13, told his disciples, "A new command I give to you." And that's when he tells them to love one another. Now, nearly 70 years after this, 60 or 70 years after Jesus stated that, John says, this isn't a new command anymore. You all ought to know this. All right, that one of the primary teachings of Jesus is that his followers would be defined by love. That people will know them if they know them for nothing else. People will know his people by the love they have for one another and the love they have for others. How loving and accepting they are of all people, regardless. And it's an important element in his teaching and in the teachings of others. In fact, we remember in 1 John, one of the things that set the false teachers apart from the real teachers, or the genuine teachers, are the fact that the false teachers didn't treat people with love. Likely, the people who would agree with them and who would come and listen to them, they treated well. But those who wouldn't, or those who rejected them and pushed back against their teaching, they probably treated poorly. And so, it was important that they know that love is a really important issue here. And so he's saying, listen, y'all ought to know this, but love is going to be a central characteristic, something that should distinguish us from the rest of the world. It's important to intensely focus our love on one another, on the better of one another, and that as we love, it becomes obvious that we have a great concern and care for one another, and that we're always trying to build each other up, that we're willing to make sacrifices for one another because we love each other the way we should and the way we do. He also uses this phrase that's common to John's writing, and that is he talks about walking in love. In verse 6, he says, "And this is love, that we walk in obedience, and in obedience to his commands. As you have heard from the beginning, his command is that you walk in love." So walk in obedience and walk in love. What does he mean by that? What does he mean to walk? Again, it's one of John's great metaphors. And when he talks about walking, he means living a lifestyle that's characterized by. Okay, so I'm consistently living in such a way that is characterized by, in this passage, love and obedience. I'm walking in love and walking in obedience. People should be able to see that in my life and see that as a part of my life. That two primary characteristics about me are that I love greatly and that I'm walking in obedience to the teachings of Jesus as best I possibly can. And then he turns around and says that when you obey, you're going to love. So I want you to love. I want you to walk in obedience. And when you obey, love is going to be one of the first things that people see in you, because the primary command of Jesus is to love one another. Then John turns starting in verse 7 and talks about the false teachers. And the basic instruction here is don't give them any aid or accept them in any way, because if you give them aid, you might actually be partnering in their evil work. Verse 7, he uses the words deceivers and antichrist to describe the false teachers. Again, those words he also used in the larger work in 1 John. And an antichrist is someone who is opposed to Christ, opposed to the teachings, and opposed to Christ, who he is and what he is. And he also says here that the false teachers do not acknowledge Jesus Christ as coming in the flesh. And that's also in verse 7. Again, an important characteristic of the false teachers is their teachings about Jesus, and it's one of the three things that set them apart from real teachers. That their teaching, again, if they're these Gnostics, especially the Corinthian version of Gnostics, they're teaching that Jesus was a man who had the Spirit of God come on him after his baptism, but left him before he died on the cross. He wasn't God in the flesh. God didn't come in here or didn't stay in him the whole time. And so their teachings about Jesus was something very different, and that's rooted in their teaching that flesh is evil and spirit is good, and God, who is perfect in his spirit, would never dwell in flesh that is evil. John, again, paints that teaching as wrong. It's not the teachings of the apostles nor the teachings of Jesus, and so they need to avoid that teaching. And so anyone who doesn't teach that Jesus came in the flesh or was God in the flesh, you need to avoid them. and stay away from them. That's really, really important. In fact, he says, not only do you stay away from them, but don't do anything that would support their teaching. Remember, these teachers are proselytizing teachers. They not only want to teach this, but they want to draw people away into their teaching. They're building a congregation of their own of people who believe like they do. And so they're intentional about getting into the churches, into that area, having a voice in the leadership there, and trying to attract members of those churches away to their false teaching, and trying to draw them into again a congregation of their own. Those are the people who have fallen away that John refers to, and they're people that are living outside. They've committed a sin that does not lead to death, and so that he referred to in John chapter 5 or 1 John chapter 5, and he's saying that you need to try to get them back. That's going to be the point to that, and so it's really, really important that you do that. He says that if you welcome them or offer them lodging when they come in, so they're coming in, they're doing their teaching. They don't live in town, but they're doing their teaching. They're drawing members away. He says if they come in and people are teaching like this and living like this, don't offer them lodging or a place to don't offer them a place to stay or food or anything along those lines, or you may share in their wicked work. That's verses 10 and 11. So it was interesting. That's a Jewish, and it was also a custom of the Greeks, but a Jewish obligation was that when people who are visiting from out of town, especially if they're Jewish, come into your town, and they need a place to stay, you're obligated to offer them lodging. You're obligated to put them up out of hospitality for your brothers of Israel, your fellow Israelites. And they were supposed to do that. It was likely a Christian custom also, that that visitors who would come to town who are Christian would look for people who are Christian in that town, look for a little church in that town that's made up of those who believe in Jesus, and those people would feel an obligation to take them. So you can imagine these false teachers visiting town, meeting the people in the Christian movement and saying, oh, great. And the Christian movement, again, being very generous and hospitable, would say, hey, come and stay with me. Come and stay with my family. Well, John's saying if you find out they're teaching this thing, if you find out that they're these kinds of teachers, you need to turn them out. Because if you keep them and you allow them to stay in your home and you feed them, then that's going to actually help them in the work that they're doing. And so don't do that. Don't offer them housing. Don't allow them to stay in your place, because you don't want to share in what they're doing, and you don't want to take part in that. John also, as he closes, he offers that he's planning to visit them and wants to talk more about this. And so he likely, toward the end of his life, he was getting up there in age as he's writing these letters, but he was planning to make some visits to the churches in that area, and wanting to tell them more about that. And then again, he kind of gives us another clue at the end: the children of your sister, who is chosen by God, send their greetings. And so their siblings, a sister church, likely he's likely talking about the church in Ephesus where he is, and saying that those people send their greetings to those who are receiving 2 John here. So again, that's a basic covering of the letter that John wrote, that we call 2 John. Again, it doesn't add a lot to 1 John, except for the addendum that you need to be careful not to house or feed or care for these guys in any way that's going to help their work, their evil work, he calls it. And so you gotta turn them away. So how do we do that today? I've heard in applying this book to today's term that people shun those who are false teachers, and I think that's a reasonable application. But who are false teachers? And we've talked about this when we talked about 1 John 2, because he's pretty clear about who they are. Again, the three things that he lists there have to do first with what they teach about Jesus, that they need to be true. They need to teach that he's the Son of God, and that he was God who came in the flesh as a man. He was God and man, and did what he did all the way through his death, and then obviously in his resurrection. 2 is how they treat other people. So are they acting, is their life characterized by love? And then 3, Are they walking in obedience to the commands of Christ? Does their life show a continuous improvement in terms of being who Christ has called them to be? Those are the measures that John gives in 1 John. He kind of touches on them again in 2 John and continues to remind us that that's how we need to test the genuine article. That if we can say yes to those three things, that they are teaching what's true about Jesus, that they are people who are loving and living a life of love, and they are people who are improving in terms of their walk of obedience, then they're probably the genuine article. And so, as we mentioned earlier, we can't just say that false teachers are anyone with whom we disagree. That's not false teaching, all right, necessarily. If they don't meet those three criteria, then we can't call them, at least not according to these letters, we can't call them false teachers. They may be erring teachers. They may be teachers who are teaching what's wrong or something that's not true, as we understand Scripture, but they're not false teachers. Another fact about these false teachers that we have to throw in here is that they are proselytizing teachers. In other words, they're going into different churches, teaching their false doctrines, and trying to draw people away. And it's clear that those people are the false teachers that he's talking about. And if we had someone come to Westside and want to teach an adult class and teach something that was obviously opposed to Scripture, especially when it comes to who Jesus is, then we'd want to have some conversations with that person. And if they didn't stop teaching what they were teaching, then we would have biblical precedent to send them off and to say, you can't come here and teach that anymore. And we would have a reason not to give them housing, not to help them in what they're doing, because that is the spirit and the nature of a false teacher. Certainly we have to be aware of who false teachers are and not give them aid and not give them help. But again, in the past, a lot of the people that we've referred to as false teachers are simply people who are erring brothers and sisters, people that don't agree with us, to whom we may not agree, but we definitely owe a debt of love, as they believe in Jesus as the Christ, that he was the Son of God, and that he's God in the flesh. And when they believe that, we owe them a debt of love, and we need to seek to build a relationship that allows us to walk beside them and help them to know better who Jesus is. So that's 2 John. And next time we get together, we'll be talking about 3 John and compiling that also. Tonight, if you're watching on Facebook, you may want to check Facebook, our Westside Friends and Family page. It'll have some announcements there and some things that we need to remember in our prayers. I know people would appreciate that. So join me again next week, next Wednesday night, same time, and we'll look forward to digging into 3 John. Have a good day.